we are here for the Building Bridges Through Contemporary Arts initiative. It is an initiative, as you will have read in the description, aimed at fostering cross-cultural knowledge exchange between Africa and Europe at times of social distancing and physical immobility. But this initiative sits very well within two key agendas that we've got at the University of Brighton, and I know is a national agenda in the UK and internationally, is very much linked to our aspiration to decolonize our curricula and our research, and really foster a culture of collaboration that can really bring idea into Europe-based or US-based or Western world-based type of initiative.
It's a common desire that and a shared vision that I think has brought us all together today. It's because something that Marina said, like, yes, some of these encounters have been, let's say, casual events, but I know that for some festival, for some institution in the art, this is not an accidental question, but is an intended aim, the one of fostering and nurturing different perspectives and cross-cultural exchange.
Absolutely. And the idea really is to, create a culture safe zone. This is what we call it at the foundation, a culture safe zone where people, artists, thinkers, creators feel free and feel safe to come in and explore and experiment with the ideas. This was the previous slide, sorry, is a project, a program that was started by one of the assistant curators at the foundation. It's called Young Collectors Club. And the idea is to get a bunch of young people interested in heritage, in collecting, and not just from a commercial point of view, but the idea of thinking about objects and thinking about participating in art, not waiting. Because people seem to think that art is about when I get a bunch of cash, then I have disposable income, then I'm going to buy work. It's really a way of nurturing the next generation to think more critically about how to participate, how to collect, and how to support the community. And it's interesting because it's not driven by the more senior people at the foundation, it's driven by the young curators and the curatorial training team that we have. In 2008, we launched the National Art Prize, the National Art Competition, and through it, we thought it was important to find and nurture and support artists or young people who are sort of on the trying to decide if they're interested in becoming artists or if art life is for them. It was a way of encouraging participation. And so we did that for 10 years and it was really successful. Yeah, I think coming back to the National Art Prize that we haven't continued for a while, the real thing is the general idea that you want to do a thing and you want to do it well, and you want to do it you want to keep growing, you want to maintain a certain standard for it. And, I don't feel like if sometimes the thing needs to die and be reborn in another way just to be relevant. It has to be fit for purpose. When we launched the National Art Prize, the National Art Competition, it was fit for purpose. It was really addressing a huge gap. And I believe, we're talking about COVID now, we're talking about the current pandemic conditions. It is clear that event-based economies, all of the biennials and the arts fairs and all of these things need to reinvent themselves, in my opinion, to be relevant for the future. I don't think that sort of forcing it down people's throats, trying to, insist that it has to be in a certain way, really works. I mean, it's important for tourism, I suppose, this sort of art tourism where people go from one country to another. We've all done it. And but we've understood the problems in our current syncopated situation through COVID, the real problems of these event-based economies, because somehow the speed of it from one year to the next have revealed the infrastructural deficits, have revealed the sometimes intellectual deficits, because it's all about the event, it's all about the show. I think it was in March 2020. And this was the time we began to nurture the idea of looking close to your space, your confined space, as a way of sparking another form of visual intelligence, another form of visual intellect. And because obviously we can't go to Milan, we can't go to Venice, we couldn't go to London. We're all sort of syncopated, as I said, locked in our home. So it began to spark the idea of a new way of imagining museology. And this was the first exploration into that idea.
But at some point, we last year something changed, and I think, Azu, you, of all the things that I've seen, that I've witnessed, you were the one that had the most forward-thinking idea of how to react to this situation. You worked on a project that was something kind of very innovative and something of the shape of what then we've been seeing these days, these months, repeatedly, which started actually with a real journey, right? A real journey in your country, looking for your art heritage.
The French have a great word for these festivals and the biennials that we attended called a rencontre. So these encounters, and I think it's a really more meaningful way of capturing the essence of when we gather at festivals and when we meet in Arles or when we meet in Milan for Photovogue or in Lagos. It's really an encounter. It's a way of we are gathered around the community gathered around the culture of image making. But in February 2020, I was desperately thinking about the burning topic of restitution. And I was trying to imagine how photography and image making could accelerate the project. So I traveled across various parts of the country with Dr. Clementine Dulles, who's a curator that had championed a new way of dealing with objects, ethnographic objects. She joined us on our trip and we traveled around visiting various national museums, various museums that are municipal museums that are in Nigeria. We managed to visit 12 of them, and this really dropped the idea of using photography to accelerate the conversation around restitution. And by that I mean, we really came to the thinking that, well, while the diplomats and while the politicians are obsessed with this idea of restitution and are dealing with it in their super slow way, how does the immediacy of photography spark a new visual intellect, spark a citizen's interest in photography? And that led to the idea of the home museum. And we thought, well, let's think about our home as a museum. And what are the objects that you find in your home that have the sort of what we call objects of virtue, that have a supercharged meaning to you? And this is what museology really is about. It's about heritage, it's about how objects tell a story. And so we launched this during Lagos Photo 2020, and it really, it exceeded all of our expectations, because for me, as a curator, when I come into these processes, I do not know what the end point is, becoming curious.
It is my strong belief that it's not an accidental intention, but it's intentional in the aim of some of the art institutions, like, for example, festivals, to nurture this kind of encounters and to nurture a certain vision or approach, or also, I suppose, education about art and about how looking at the world.
I actually dedicated all my professional life to this idea of ethics and aesthetics kind of blending together. I don't believe that they are two separate concepts. I strongly believe that they are really connected. And so I tried, I started working in fashion back in the 90s, and it was quite different then. And I always tried to have an approach to fashion and fashion images, which was also had contents, I always believed in fashion as a language, and fashion photography again as a language and a way to speak about different issues through fashion photography, because at the end, fashion is about identity, and it's not a superficial thing, and clothes are like one of the props that you have in a picture. So Vogue has been there for so many years. It's been pioneering its role into visual literacy, visual communication. And I was thinking, what could Vogue be if we go online, if there isn't, the restraint of the print magazine that you have just a few pages that you can use, and there is no constraint. You can reach everyone everywhere. So I wanted to do something specifically for photography. There were already pictures everywhere. There were for sure, like a lot of websites where you can upload images, but there wasn't like a curated one. And so I opened Photo Vogue, and that was 10 years ago, to all kind of photography, and everyone can upload their images, and editors of Vogue would judge them. And if they think they're okay, they go directly on the website. So this was the beginning. I couldn't imagine what it would have become. And as it's today, we have more than 250,000 photographers from all over the world, from like 200 different countries. So this is amazing. I learned so much through these photographers. I learned also this different attitude towards each other, and what we were saying, rencontre, again, it makes me think of the community, the sense of community, the strong sense of helping each other, which wasn't a given before. I always, I have to say thanks to all of the people that I met in my career that opened up my vision into the world. The importance of traveling and meeting people and rencontre people. And, I was always aware of what it meant, issues of representations, and what it meant, a concept of inclusivity, of diversity, of multiple ways of seeing, and how, for too long, it's always been, the narrator has always been the white male man, telling the stories of everyone in the world. And I wanted to contribute a little bit with my power, with what I could do, to try to break this down, to break down stereotypes. For instance, I decided I would never be in a jury that just has white jurors. And, and so with this in mind, I always, tried to have the juries as more diverse as possible, to be conscious of the photographers we were choosing, of their background. And then, as you know well, I believe that arts can actually obtain so much more than laws and everything, because if you change people's gaze, then their mind changes too, and so I feel if we start showing things and normalize certain situations that are already normal in real life but not in the visual world, then maybe we can change. So the thing is, this pandemic hit us, and again, the festival was such an important part of our work, and the idea of giving a space for people to meet, to exchange opinions, to see their own, the artists that they love, to talk. And so, but at the same time, I think it would have been really not giving the right message to just stop, just say, because we can't do it physically, we don't do anything. No. And at the time, there weren't things. I mean, all I was seeing was the replica, the exact replica of real physical spaces, but on the web. And I didn't like that, because I think that what's great about digital and the web is that the only limit is the fantasy and and budget, unfortunately. And I started to research into, for instance, virtual reality, this, that, to understand what was that I could do, what was that I could also finance, because so I started thinking of the platform, and I decided to do a platform dedicated to the festival, with the same as Azu has done, having talks like we're doing today online, and also we also did an exhibition inspired by what the amazing team of Photoville does in New York every year, to have an exhibition outside in the road in Milano. And I also learned another thing that it's interesting from this experience, and that I would like to replicate. It is that you get to you arrive at people that maybe you wouldn't when you do a festival in a closed space, that just the people who are interested will come. Like this, I also had old people that were, insulting me because I put nudes in the gardens of Milano. I mean, it's but that's good, it creates a dialogue, and it shows images even to people who wouldn't come to see them, if it was a closed exhibition.
Of course, because sometimes it's also important to reach out to those who are not of our environment. That's the main objective. Actually, you're not interested in talking to ourselves. You're interested in opening up the discussion. And I think maybe because of sometimes I thought maybe because you had Photo Vogue, that's what helped you in imaging a different way of doing it last year actually. And let's not forget that that platform has not only been a showcase, but it's been a big opportunity for many artists that didn't have a career to actually have a career and have an opportunity to work, to be known, to be
I have to
recognized.
Many of the artists, ended up shooting the cover of Vogue US, Vogue UK. They won prizes with ICP, POM. So I'm really happy about the platform. I'm not saying it's just a platform, but I think we're helping.
So I am also interested in listening from an artist perspective, what this influence or presence can represent for the artist himself and for the connection with the public.
I wanted to really explore ideas around education. So I have an education background and worked in education consulting in Nigeria. And I mean, it was just problematic, and really just a microcosm of what happens on a larger national scale and perhaps even on the continent. And I wanted to bring some of these challenges within the education sector into my arts and my artistic voice as the very first thing I would be known for. And so I applied for the African Artists Foundation's National Art Competition. So that was 2014. And the prompt then was interventions. And so that was like the perfect opportunity for me to talk about
I think we might have some slideshow. Let's see if we can show it while you keep talking.
Okay. I thought you were going to say the internet is bad. I was going to say no.
No.
Okay. I'm glad I did it when I did, because I had an incredible cohort of artists. So there were 12 of us finalists. They brought us over to Lagos for a retreat, which for me was a really memorable part of the entire experience. It's almost sort of like an artist camp for a few days, where we were tossing around various ideas. And though it was a competition, it was just very friendly. And I got a sense of what was going on in the Nigerian art sector from all the competitors. So that was really memorable. I ended up winning the second prize for the game installation. That was the Ella Natsui Outstanding Production Prize, and went on to be featured on CNN. But I think it really says something that this very first work that I dreamt of and was able to actualize and realize was supported by an institution, and it really reflects where I'm at right now. Just sort of going back to this sort of institutional support, I just rounded up a residency at the Smithsonian Museum of African Art. So I was a 2020 artist research fellow there, and it's one of those really open-ended opportunities where you have free reign to all their archives, their resources, the staff, the curators. And so I feel like I know the museum sort of structure quite well. And to Azu's point about the archival project, I was able to access so much from various archives. I've been doing some work on American swimmers. And so I was able to look at the history of the sort of American swimming culture, American swimming pools. It started as a way to, there it is, baby, as a way to describe my foray into the art world and being young, not necessarily in age, but just within the sector and not really understanding what the rules and conventions were, stakeholders, gatekeepers, all of this. And, just there's no real blueprint. So I used the swimming pool metaphor to just show a young swimmer diving into very deep and turbulent waters and trying to figure out the rules of the game, getting the red ball being sort of like the red stickers you place on sold artworks in an art gallery context. And to just almost serve as a balance between this more institutional supported educational work that I really, really care about, and like feeding myself as an artist and being able to support myself commercially and financially. So just toying with that tension, that's where this tagged series came from. And that's where I introduced the motif of the swimmer. But as I started doing various residencies, I did one in Paris, the Cité des Arts in Paris in 2017. And then I did another one at ISCP, the International Studio Curatorial Program in New York. And as I was saying before, even with AAF, this idea that when you're surrounded by other artists is when you feel sort of most safe and able to see your experiences and other artists' experiences as well. And so like being joined by multiple artists and swimmers then evolved into this synchronized swimmers narrative, where the swimmers are working together and performing these like really beautiful stunts and supporting one another in that effort. And so I then came across real life synchronized swimmers, a group of young children in Ibadan, which is where I am now in Nigeria, about 14 years old, and created a body of work that was inspired by them. And they later came to perform actually at a solo exhibition I had in Lagos. But yeah, just these real life synchronized swimmers just kept popping up. And I came across now a group of senior citizen synchronized swimmers in New York, in Harlem, called the Harlem Honeys and Bears. So I used that opportunity to really shadow the team and get to know them, created these portraits of them, and also did a short documentary. But yeah, I really got to know this community and learned more about the history of public swimming pools in the States. And it was completely unintentional to meet this group and then understand the significance of their existence. I had to go back into the archives. And bring out the historical context for that in the documentary and in the works. And so again, these weren't artists that I was working with, but they were real life swimmers. And I think one thing about being an artist is that it can be quite lonely. So it's always a beautiful thing to be able to work with a community. And they were great. They were hilarious. Great fun to work with. And I found that when I would exhibit them in exhibitions or art fairs, people would, the commentary I would get was that, oh, is this a commentary on Black people swimming? And I had never, ever thought about it like that at the beginning. But with increasing feedback and people sort of telling me their own swim stories. I mean, people now, when I say I paint swimmers, they just volunteer their personal swim story. And it varies, right? Some of them are really sort of beautiful, some of them are tragic. But you do find that in the case of, the like Black swimmers, there are more often times sort of tragic endings or issues around education, lack of access to teachers and spaces to swim. So that was something that has become part of the narrative. I yielded again to my to the subjects that I was portraying, but then also to the people, the viewers that were giving me feedback. The pandemic for me was a nice extension of that break. I'm still enjoying a bit of a break. I mean, I'm constantly working. I mean, like constantly doing one thing or the other, doing a lot of experimentation, which it involves a lot of time. It involves a lot of time and space to make your mistakes in private and to work through those within your own timeline. And I would say it's taken quite a bit of courage for me to sort of establish that way of working, but I do prefer it.
Now Zoom is like my second house. I'm on Zoom from the morning until and if you think about it, 1 year ago, it wasn't like that. And just think for a moment, if we had this kind of pandemic without internet, without Zoom. So, technology, as I think some philosophers said, and, we don't end where our body ends. We end where our imaginations or where our communication can take us, right? So in a way, we're all connected, and more we're all connected. The difference is that when we go to places, when we go to see an exhibition, when we travel, when we experience things, not just with one sense, we experience things with the body, we experience things with the smelling, there are so many other things that are involved that
hearing.
Yeah, that all of this sorts of stays in our memory more, it sticks more, it has a different impact on us, which is the same thing as the difference between watching photography in a book or on an exhibition.
I think that the fact that the entire globe, everyone on the planet have been impacted in one way or another by this current pandemic conditions. And I like the idea of syncopation, the collapse of the timeline, the collapse. It has brought us, in a way, into similar timelines. And so we're all syncopated and we're all watching online the murder of George Floyd. And somehow that made everyone complicit in the murder. And we couldn't rush off to fly to Milan or to Japan or wherever. We're all at home watching this. And we all took an interest. And the situation became something that we had never even imagined. The people in the UK, in Bristol, who know the legacy of Colson will tell you that there was never a time that anyone could ever imagine that Colson's statue or any of that sort of ideology would ever collapse, because everywhere you go in Bristol, there's Colson this, Colson that. And so that collapse of the timeline, I believe, always historically leads to a new timeline. It's been dominated by the ideology of Afrofuturism. And everywhere you go, everyone here must have seen at least one exhibition with that philosophy underpinning the exhibition. So that futurism, that idea of a dystopia, utopia has arrived. And because we are living through this sort of dystopic moment, this sort of completely collapsed moment, I think it allows us the opportunity to come together to create a new timeline. We're no longer interested in Afrofuturism or whatever. We're in a dystopic situation where we can actually come together to create a manifestation that, so that when we have the encounters, wherever we have them in Lagos, in Tbilisi, or wherever it is, it has a real agency and power that can do something more, that gives a lot more responsibility to the artist. So that is my hope, and that is what I think I'm anticipating.
Personally, it came to a point where it was just too much. It was too much to be experiencing my life and everybody else's life at once. I did detach largely from social media for about 7 months, just to find my own thoughts. Because after a while, I found that my thoughts were, I didn't know where they were coming from as an artist, which is not, I didn't find it helpful in that time. And so for me, there was a bit of technology overwhelm that I didn't feel was enhancing my practice or just even my well-being at the time. And so in that period of detaching, I just found out that, oh, you can actually call people. You can call people and, talk to them about what's going on in their lives. There's no assumption. You didn't see anything on social media that indicates anything, as a starting point for a conversation, which was really refreshing to just go back to this place where there's zero assumptions and you just speak to someone and take what they're saying at face value. And you get to have like real conversations.
It might be part of a process that we all need to learn how to engage more in a more nurturing way with the technology, and at the same time keep in mind that we need to keep the balance to who we are and to listen to ourselves.
So I have a whole series of works about this called Dear Young Artist. And I wrote like 6 stanza poem, which was then turned into a song by M.I. What's it? M.I. Agbaga, so he's like a big Nigerian rap artist. And I talk a lot about just taking things really slowly. And I came up with that poem in 2016 prior to like when I actually encountered any of these challenges, any real challenges. And so maybe it was, I don't know, prophetic in a way. But yeah, I think I said take things slowly because it is addressed to a younger artist, but there's this indication that you want to grow and evolve to be an older artist, right? And a mature artist, and one that has experience, and experience just takes time. I think if you look through my work, you'll see a lot of advice there, actually. I think I am always sort of constantly speaking to my younger self or people who want to learn and educate themselves about art, but also just about life, how to create friendships, how to maintain friendships within the art world. I think that's important. And I think in the last 2 years, I set out on a mission to really separate work life from personal life. I think in the art world that can easily become entangled. Your person is like you, Mojukwala, as the artist, but you're also just, you have your own life. And so this is it's a balancing act, almost sort of going to my calendar and saying, okay, these days, I'm actually now very neurotic about it. Everything's color coded and funding is separate from myself versus what I'm doing for my practice, because otherwise you just sort of give yourself entirely to this practice. And in some ways that's what's required at times, but at other times you just have to take yourself back. So I've planned a lot. I spent the last maybe 3 years doing a lot of planning for the future. So retirement, maternity, again, become a little bit neurotic about these things. And so that's always sort of like a reminder that make sure you're planning ahead time, and that things change. But I do think that increasingly people are going to be creatives, artists. I think you're going to see a huge shift of people just going into the creative sectors in the future. And so there's much to be learned about the artist's way of living and their own sort of struggles and experiences.
So we spend a lot of our time meeting with young artists and photographers, reviewing their work, doing our best to share knowledge and experience and whatever guidance is available. I think the one thing that a lot of young people really need to do is, put their finger in the pie. They need to get out there and really, this idea of, oh, I'm waiting, I was making the body of work and then COVID came, then I have to wait. No, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, your work is about creating interventions and finding solutions. So where there's a blockage, you have to find a way to the side road, and that's what being creative is about. And because sometimes we find that it's the same people applying for the same things, almost like if the others are not aware of it or they feel like it's not for them. So I would really suggest that artists take a big look, photographers as well, and enter as many of these photo contests as possible and apply for as many of these grants as possible as well.
I think it's very important to reach out to us. I receive thousands of emails, and it's not that I answer to everyone, but I look at everything. And if there is something that it's interesting for me, I always reply. And if I don't reply, I've seen it anyway. And there are open calls, there are festivals, there are portfolio reviews. You have to be there, don't be shy. You have to be on social media. You have to be on Instagram. If you're a photographer and you're not on Instagram, I mean, that's like anachronistic. And so there are a lot of chances and possibilities today that there weren't a few years ago. Go and grab them.
I go back to the point made earlier about the importance of having those art institutions having a presence in fairly prominent locations, and in a way opening up the minds of those of us who often come into a space, we are projected or parachuted into a reality, having a very limited knowledge of that reality. I mean, I've been very fortunate because I've traveled throughout the African continent for various reasons, primarily related to education and tourism. But it was beyond me that, when you look at the imagery of the African continent, even in my own specific disciplinary context, is all about wildlife, is all about the natural environment, is all about, pristine beaches and things like that. And very, very rarely the arts aspect is prominent on the imagery of the African continent, unless we talk about the usual, traditional imagery related to crafts and masks and things like that. Because we talked about casuality at the beginning of this talk today, and what casuality can create is the opportunity to learn from those who live in a reality which we perceive very often in a completely different way. And this is valid for both ways. We're talking about Europe, Africa, but we're talking about, the exchange of knowledge is obviously twofold. And I'm hoping that this dialogue can develop in that direction. I particularly like what Alessia said earlier about the ethics and the aesthetics of Africa.
I do know that my experience has been applying to various research residencies. It's quite a process. The proposal process is really tedious. And I thought I was a good writer. Turns out I'm not when it comes to these type of things. So sometimes I'll have to maybe work with someone, hire help. Somebody has to maybe go through the proposal and make sure that I'm articulating what I'm trying to say, because it's all very much in my head. And you need to be sometimes like a good artist, a good writer, a good administrator, be able to do budgets, and like nobody has all those skill sets. And so I would say when it comes to proposals, generally, definitely in the States, the bar is very high, but just generally, like get help. it's okay to get help and have somebody look through your proposal and pay someone to effectively help you with the writing and making sure your ideas are clearly communicated.
You know, you have mentioned briefly, Azu, earlier, the value of having certain messages with the Floyd case and the Black Lives Matters campaign, and all these kind of very topical issues that sometimes may lose meaning if they are not narrated by the right people. And certainly contemporary artists which are engaging in those thematics from within that thematics may have much more impact in terms of also shaping the future of how we talk about certain issues, which sometimes are very difficult to look at, particularly if there is an issue of the being politically correct and a lot of other aspects that we're all aware. And I did appreciate also the point made by Alessia at the beginning, you know, being also a European navigating a very multicultural setting, how difficult it is. And I'm sure that Maria Pia and myself have often those conversations in terms of the accuracy, in terms of the appropriateness, in terms of making sure that what we've learned through our relationship with a community of practice, which is very multicultural, is representative of those different realities.
It was good to be here sharing this with you. I think what we have learned, as was saying before at the very beginning, that we should be open to and more inclusive even in the way we share our practice, not only cross-cultural, but probably, as Marina was saying, interdisciplinary, because that's the way forward, I would say.